Looking back on the Fairly Odd Parents, the whole premise of the show is a really interesting one. I mean, it revolves around a world where when kids have it bad enough in life, they're given a magical fairy godparent to grant their every wish and bring them happiness along the way. Or, in the case of Timmy, he was lucky enough to get 2 fairy godparents because his are a married package deal. However, one thing that always crossed my mind seeing this show as a kid was how weird it is that no other kids around Timmy had fairy godparents. Like, it seemed as if the big qualifier for getting fairy godparents was just having crummy, neglectful parents, usually exacerbated by other outside circumstances. For example, Timmy's evil babysitter Vicky consistently tormenting him. The fact that this show went on for so long, with us being shown thousands of different fairies in Fairy World, yet we didn't really see any other kids in Dimsdale with fairy godparents, was just a really perplexing thing for me as a kid. Like, sure, it's a fairy godparent's job to make themselves hidden so nobody knows that their godchild has a mystical being watching over them. But as you'll see in this episode, it's one of those where, like, if you know, you know. When you're a kid with fairy godparents, it's not really hard to tell when another kid has fairy godparents. With that being said, Timmy being seemingly the only kid in Dimsdale with fairies would change come partway into season 2, when we would see the introduction of a child whose life is so morbid and dark compared to Timmy's that I'm surprised he didn't get 2 fairy godparents just to compensate for the lack of love and care in his life. It's a character whose existence is such a tragic contradiction that it's more or less led to his heart being metaphorically turned to stone in the process. Before we get into it though, I really want to thank you for clicking on this video and for being a part of my YouTube journey. I genuinely value your time, and I really can't thank you enough for choosing to spend a bit of it with me and my cool little community here on YouTube. Also, if you feel comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments. How's life been treating you? Is everything okay? What do you have going on right now? Is there anything on your plate that's bothering you? Or maybe have you accomplished any goals recently that you'd like to share? Please, friends, if you're feeling up to it, talk to me in the comments. Honestly, life's been a flaming bag of turds recently, and for me, bridging the gap between myself and my audience here on YouTube always seems to help my mental health. I'll do my best to respond to everyone, and I genuinely love to be here to talk with you guys. Today, on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're checking out the Fairly Odd Parents episode, Very Fairy Quite Contrary. This episode starts out bright and early at sunrise outside of a movie theater which is premiering Crash Nebula the movie. Out front, we see a line of tents going around the corner of the building, all filled with kids who slept overnight in line, hoping to be the first people to see the premiere. At the very front of that line is none other than Timmy Turner, who is through the roof excited to see the movie with his best friends.
Is it time? Did we succeed?
Yes, my friends! Behold! After successfully camping out all night, we will make history as the first kids to see Crash Nebula the movie!
After me.
Hey, who the heck are you? Remy Buxaplenty, richer than you will ever hope to be.
Timmy stands up for himself and his friends, saying that it doesn't matter to them how rich this kid is because they were there in line first. Regardless of that though, as soon as the box office opens, this kid helps himself, calling butlers with a snap of his fingers to kneel down and act as steps for him to be able to reach the counter. He tells the guy at the box office that he wants to buy every ticket for the premiere, and all of the kids cheer instinctively, assuming that this rich kid is treating them to the movie. However, their excitement is very short-lived.
Oh, please. They're not for you unseemly urchins. I need all the extra seats for my piles of money.
A little later, we cut to an arcade where Timmy is spending his time playing a pretty sick-looking VR game in hopes of breaking the high score and getting his name on the door of the boys' bathroom. Sadly, his hopes are dashed when he's game overed by a cheap shot from behind on part of none other than Remy, who gets 1,000,000 points in one shot using a big golden blaster. Timmy takes off his VR helmet and Remy is taken away, having his name hung up in gold on the player's lounge. We then cut to later that night where Timmy is telling Cosmo and Wanda that something is fishy about this Remy kid.
How could that Remy kid get so much better than me at
Everything?
Yeah, and he's everywhere.
I know one special place we can go where he can never ever be.
Just what I needed. Some good old-fashioned superhero bashing evil action.
In this riveting tale of the Crimson Chin, we see him getting bested by the Golden Gut, and right in the nick of time, Timmy, as Cleft the Boy Chin Wonder, springs into action to save him. However, right at the last second, he's instead saved by Remy, dressed as Cleft the Rich Boy Chin Wonder, leaving Timmy in the dust. We then cut to later on, where Timmy is finally fed up with encountering this rich jerk everywhere he goes, so he decides to go straight to his house and spy on him in an attempt to see how this kid is everywhere that Timmy is.
Son.
Oh, right, son. It certainly was thrilling spending our daily 2 minutes with you.
Well, time is money.
Money? Where?
Have a nice time with your oddly colored ferret, son.
I think I know how Remy is pulling all this stuff off. Remy Buxaplenty has a fairy godparent.
Cosmo and Wanda immediately start playing dumb and trying to make it seem like they didn't know, but it's hopeless. Timmy can tell plain as day that they aren't surprised for a second and that they were well aware of Remy's godparent. Timmy is offended by the fact that they knew and didn't tell him, but Wanda poofs up the rulebook and explains that they aren't allowed to tell him about any other kids that have fairies. He has to figure it out on his own. Little does Timmy know, though, the rabbit hole actually goes deeper than he realizes.
His name is Wandisimo Magnifico. He's my ex-boyfriend.
So, Turner has got parents too. Why didn't you tell me?
Pero it is not permitted. It is in the rules. And I am a fairy of principles. And principles, much like my biceps, are muy bonito. Una vida sin principales no es una vida.
Of course, Remy's immediate worry is that Timmy will wish that he's richer than Remy, so his answer to that is to wish that Timmy's fairies were gone. Luckily for Timmy, Wandisimo can't do that because, as he explains to Remy, that's against the rules. Wandisimo says that the only way a godchild's fairy godparents can be wished away is by the godchild themselves or in a magical duel.
Godparent against godparent. Winner keeps his fairies. Loser, and by loser I mean Turner, forgets he ever had them.
Remy lets out an evil laugh, and in the blink of an eye, we see Timmy walking through the door and into Remy's house as they confront one another about the existence of their fairy godparents. In that moment, Wandisimo catches the sight of Wanda, and we learn that he's like creepily obsessed with her.
Wanda, my sweet. I have missed you as the sun misses the dawn.
Well, that's all very flattering. But that's my hand, pal. And guess what? I don't need magic to turn it into a fist. Hey, you... Oh, bunny rabbit.
Wandisimo panics and uses his magic to turn Cosmo into a turtle before running back to Remy, crying about how Cosmo almost made a fist and how he's lucky to be alive. Disregarding his fairy godparent, Remy immediately pulls out a massive wad of money and asks how much it would take for Timmy to wish away his fairies.
You know what stinks about you, Remy? You're rich, you have godparents, and you're still miserable.
What? You think you're happier than me?
Dude, I know I'm happier than you. And I've got better godparents.
Wandisimo is absolutely offended at this insinuation, and at that, Remy calls a magical duel. In but a quick poof, we see the boys and their fairies teleported to Fairy World and a massive coliseum where fairies are gathered from far and wide to see the duel unfold.
These are the rules. Winner takes all. Loser won't recall. Best 2 out of 3 wins.
What? If I lose you forever?
So there's absolutely no pressure.
Your voice, it is like the chorus of 1,000 angels.
Yeah, well, my foot is gonna feel like the chorus of 1,000. Revenge!
We cut to the first challenge, which is to prove that the godparent can save their godchild from any danger. Jorgen poofs in a giant ape, which grabs Remy and starts shaking him while throwing barrels in a scene that looks like something directly out of the original Donkey Kong. As Wandisimo dodges the barrels, he decides that the best way for him to save Remy is to play some music on his guitar.
The handsome fairy has failed to rescue his godchild. But he is still very sexy.
This I can live with.
Jorgen poofs Remy out of the ape's hand and replaces him with Timmy, who's immediately screaming for help as the ape shakes him. Wanda panics a bit, not knowing what to do, and Cosmo decides that he needs some thinking food, so he pulls out a bunch of bananas. Of course, the ape sees that and decides to trade Cosmo's bananas for Timmy, while Cosmo isn't paying attention.
Good job, honey, distracting that ape. Huh? Hey, that monkey ate my banana.
The puny fairy has rescued his godchild. Timmy Turner and his fairies win round 1. Challenge 2. The child must now help the godparents by distracting a human adult so they don't see them magically douse this fire.
This time, Timmy gets to go first as he approaches this man who's completely enamored with the fire. He tries a few things before doing a card trick, which just makes the fire bigger as all of the cards fly directly into it, causing Jorgen to put a stop to Timmy's attempt before he burns down the entirety of Fairy World. Next up, of course, is Remy.
Look, money!
Round 2 to Remy Buxaplenty.
Look, we can call this a draw right now. I don't care if you have a godparent, Remy.
But I care if you do! My parents are never home! I never get to see them! Why should you get real parents and godparents that love you when I don't?
At Remy's decision to keep pursuing the duel, Jorgen announces that it's time for the tiebreaker. The third and final challenge is for the godchild to describe the most creative imaginary animal that they can. Then the godparents have to turn them into that animal. Whoever comes up with the most spectacular creation will be the winner.
I wish I was a crab with 2 heads. Ta-da!
Yawn.
Yeah, gonna be hard to beat that. But just in case, I've got something better than imagination. Highly paid consultants.
Remy sits there on the phone being fed ideas from one of his paid consultants while Timmy panics. He knows good and well that whatever those creative cronies come up with is going to be way crazier than a 2-headed crab. He says that they have to do something to stop him, and Wanda suggests that they try something to distract him or Wandisimo. Just then, Cosmo comes up with a perfect idea to derail them.
Hey, Muscles Magoo! Look at me! I'm fancy, and my long black hair flows in the wind.
Stop making fun of my out of duty.
10 seconds left.
Wandisimo! Don't let him distract you!
I'm strong, but I still lost my woman to an idiot.
5, 4.
Hurry up!
Chunky hunky.
Stop!
Monkey chunky hunky.
I cannot concentrate.
In a moment of overwhelm and panic, Wandisimo throws his charged wand and it ends up creating the most amazing animal ever. However, it's Timmy that gets transformed, not Remy. The crowd goes wild at the sight of the insanely huge dragon-like creature, and Remy immediately feels confident that he won. However, Wanda points out that the stipulation laid out was that the child turned into the most fantastic animal wins.
She is right. Timmy Turner gets to keep his godparents, and you lose yours.
Adios, Remy Buxaplenty. We will not meet again.
Thankfully, Timmy won and he gets to keep his fairies, but he feels really sorry for Remy because he didn't want to make his life worse or have his fairies taken away. But because Remy just couldn't rein in his anger and his need for control, that wasn't really something that Timmy could stop. He says that he wishes he could help Remy, and Cosmo and Wanda say that they can definitely do that. With that, Timmy wishes that Remy's parents had more time to spend with him, and before you know it, we cut to a deserted island in the middle of the ocean with a giant yacht crashed atop it. On the island, we see Remy talking to his mom and dad about how they're probably going to be there for a while.
I'll count the money.
And I'll count the money.
And I'll find us something to eat.
Great idea, Liam.
Remy, but it's a start. Why, hello there, little fella. You look familiar, like a long-lost friend or something. Oh well, who wants turtle soup?
No, I am too sexy to eat.
Honestly, it's really interesting how in just the short span of 11 minutes, the writers of this show were able to really make us feel so many feelings towards Remy. Of course, the obvious disdain that I'm sure a lot of us felt seeing this as kids, but also that sense of pity that seems to be stronger in hindsight than it was back then. I mean, taking it from the top, the first actions that we see from this kid were enough to make you absolutely hate him. They really just came out swinging. First of all, they stress just how excited that Timmy is, and of course, the fact that he's sleeping in a tent at the front of the line implies that he's been waiting here for probably a long time now. Then, once we have that established, they introduce Remy, who immediately thinks that it's okay to just cut in line because he's rich. I mean, first of all, the audacity. Like, you're an absolute obnoxious jerk, dude. But on top of that, why didn't anyone even attempt to do anything? Like, Timmy said something, but didn't really push at all to stop him. He just kind of accepted that this kid was asserting himself and didn't really look past that. But also, what about the rest of the kids? I imagine a good old-fashioned angry mob of children could have taken care of this kid easily. But instead, they just kind of stand by and watch while this rich jerk takes whatever he wants. Again, the audacity to just walk up and take the front spot because you think you deserve it for being wealthy. It'd be one thing if he walked up to Timmy and paid him a ton of money for his spot, but he didn't even do that. In that scenario, at least Timmy would have gotten something out of it. In this case, though, he just kind of spat in the face of all the other kids there who had actually waited in line. Now, anyone else think it was kind of weird how this movie premiere was first thing in the morning? I mean, talk about setting yourself up for a crummy turnout. Who's going to the movies first thing in the morning? In real life, public movie premieres are usually at night the day before the movie is actually coming out. I mean, I saw one recently and it was at like 8 p.m. at my local theater. The thought of having to camp out all night though? Ugh, that sounds awful. I mean, I could stomach a midnight launch for a video game back in the day, but first thing in the morning at a public theater? No movie is worth that, in my opinion. On top of that, though, completely random, but their want to make history by being the first kids in the world to see this movie doesn't make any sense. I mean, even if Timmy and his friends are on the East Coast, sure, they'd be among the first people in the United States to see it, but I'm pretty sure the kids in Australia would have them beat, assuming that this movie is due for international release. Continuing on with Remy, though, I thought it was so weird that Remy was seemingly targeting Timmy at first. It doesn't really make sense because we have it confirmed in this episode that neither of them knew that the other had fairies beforehand. So, with that bit of info, what are the odds that Remy would go to that exact theater and spitefully cut Timmy, of all people, in line? or the odds of them being at the same arcade playing the same exact game at the same time. Or, of course, them being in the same exact Crimson Chin comic book. It's just really weird because the way they made it seem like Timmy couldn't escape Remy, you'd think that Remy was like following him because he knew that Timmy had fairies. On that note though, how could we have never seen Remy before? Like, all of a sudden, Timmy can't even go into the Crimson Chin comic book without running into him. But we've never seen this kid at all, not even once before this episode. It seems kind of odd that all of a sudden Remy would be everywhere, unless he was specifically targeting Timmy. I also wanted to take a second to touch on the VR portion of that arcade scene. In the game, we see Remy having a golden blaster with a big $sign on it, which was clearly OP. Like, one blast and Timmy was done for. Now, it's got me over here wondering, did the Fairly Odd Parents predict pay-to-win microtransactions in video games? Literally, this is a real thing nowadays, but back then when this premiered, it certainly wasn't. Fast forwarding a bit though, I do have to point out the part where Timmy is standing directly in front of Remy's house, plain as day, and spying on him. Like, he's directly on the sidewalk, right in front of this kid's house, not even attempting to hide whatsoever. It's just so weird too that nobody noticed him doing this and said anything. Furthermore, with them being billionaires, why don't they live in a gated community? I would imagine that people chasing a lavish lifestyle the way that they do would live in the utmost of protected gated community, hence why it's strange that Timmy can just stare in their house with binoculars. Even more so, I'm kind of surprised that a neighbor didn't see and call Timmy in thinking that he was casing the neighborhood. I also wanted to bring up that part where we see inside of Remy's house, and we end up overhearing Wandisimo and him talking. Honestly guys, I really don't know much Spanish at all. I know about enough to ask for water, beer, the bathroom, my suitcase, and the library. I did, however, catch one particular moment of Wandisimo speaking Spanish, where he called Remy perro, and that really just had me so confused. I thought perro meant dog, and I'm not sure why he'd be calling his godchild a dog. Now, I did a little searching online through some forums, and I guess it can actually mean various things depending on context or the dialect specifically, such as very cool, buddy, or champ, or I guess infrequently it can be used in context of like a girl talking to a guy to call him handsome. Apparently it can also mean something distasteful in slang, like someone said no seas tan perro can translate to something along the lines of don't be so malevolent. But like, I'm curious, to my friends in the comments who understand Spanish, what do you think he meant when he called Remy perro? Also, after that, Wandisimo spouted off like a whole ass paragraph in Spanish super fast, and it went just completely over my head.
Una vida sin principales no es una vida.
If anyone is able to translate that as well, I'm super curious as to what he was saying. Speaking of Wandisimo though, I do find it interesting that this episode is actually considered inappropriate because of the over-sexualization of him as a character. Now that I can kind of see. I mean, there's a part where Jorgen calls him sexy, and of course the crowd cheering at that, seemingly in agreement. That was kind of weird, for sure, but what really struck me as inappropriate is the way that Wandisimo is still thirsting over Wanda, who very clearly is not interested in him. Like, he's a total creep towards her and trying to like kiss her hand and stuff, when she's full-blown in a committed monogamous marriage and very clearly uncomfortable with him. He doesn't stop, too. You can tell that this guy plain as day does not care about how she feels. He's just such a gross pervert, and like, I kind of get the trope that they're trying to portray, but I feel like they would have benefited from making him a little less Johnny Bravo-esque, if you know what I mean. I will admit though, one aspect of his Johnny Bravo-esque character that was appreciated was how much of a coward that Wandisimo is. Like, he's this huge muscle-bound beefcake who's constantly ripping shirts and curling dumbbells, yet at the same time, he's a huge coward who's literally fearing for his life at just the idea of Cosmo attempting to make a fist. I really don't enjoy the weird pervy aspect of his character, but the cowardice contradicting the muscles is pretty funny. Another huge thing that I wanted to talk about is the part where Remy and Timmy confront one another with the information that they both know that the other has fairy godparents. During this interaction, Remy scoffs at Timmy, even thinking that he's happier than him. And to that, Timmy responds with a bold,
"Dude, I know I'm happier than you."
Man, just the tone in his voice made for such a hardcore mic drop of a moment there. Timmy didn't have a single doubt in his mind that even with his parents being gone all the time, and his evil babysitter ruining his life on purpose, he's still leagues happier than this lonely kid who has all the money that he could ever want. To Timmy, it's clear from a mile away that Remy is severely unhappy in his life and is using money as a band-aid to cure the stab wound of crippling unhappiness. What Timmy doesn't realize at this point, though, is just why Remy is so unhappy. Can't help but wonder if maybe Remy had opened up about just why he's so miserable, maybe if things had gone differently and Timmy could have helped him. Sadly, I'm sure we all know the answer here is yes, that definitely would have been the case. If Remy could have just not been such a little jerk, he could have kept Wandisimo and had a better relationship with his parents thanks to Timmy's help. I mean, even at the end when Timmy had gone through nearly having his fairies taken away, he was still willing to help Remy. That right there says so much about Timmy as a person, but furthermore, it cements the fact that he definitely would have helped Remy before all of this had happened. In the end, regardless of all that occurred, Timmy feels really bad for Remy losing his fairy godparent, even though he's a conniving little jerk who tried to do the same to Timmy. Timmy, being the good person that he is though, doesn't want Remy to be sad or have this miserable life. It's just a shame that Remy couldn't have a bit of that same energy towards Timmy. Now, we certainly have to talk about how messed up it is that the magical duel is a thing to begin with. Like, these fairies gather in crowds in a coliseum to celebrate this and everything. It's honestly pretty awful. They not only enable but seemingly encourage a sad child with a miserable life having the one thing meant to bring them happiness taken away. And keep that in mind, dude. Every child who has a fairy godparent got one because their life was that awful and miserable. And here all of these fairies are, having a tradition that celebrates one of these kids having that taken away forcibly. It's even more awful too when we consider, like we saw with Timmy, a kid could have this happen to them and not even want to be there in the first place. Remy challenged Timmy, and it didn't matter if Timmy accepted the challenge or not. He was immediately placed in a situation where if he didn't play the game, his fairies were taken away from him forever. Seriously, just imagine that though. Imagine being a sad kid who has an awful life, and one of the few things that bring you joy is your fairy godparent. But some jerk kid who also has a fairy decides that he doesn't want you to have one anymore, so he challenges you to a duel, forcing you to put your fairies on the line. Then you lose, even though, again, you don't want to be there in the first place. As you lose, all of these other fairies in the stands staring are cheering at your loss. Meanwhile, you're grieving and saying goodbye to the person who's been assigned to be your guardian. Now, when we look at it through that lens, man, the fairy duel is pretty messed up. Furthermore, how dumb was it for Remy to want to call a magical duel and risk his own fairy in the first place? I mean, if we're being real, Wandisimo is akin to Cosmo in intelligence. He isn't necessarily the smartest bulb in the box. If Remy could have looked past his own greed, hatred, and anger, maybe he would have stopped to think that he was signing up for a 2-on-1 battle, that Wandisimo was very much so unable to win in nearly any universe. He didn't even stop to think that by challenging Timmy, he's putting himself in harm's way as well. And that right there highlights the danger of letting your emotions take control and allowing them to dominate your logical thought process. As awful as Remy is though, we definitely have to acknowledge how sad it is when Timmy confronted him at the duel, saying that he doesn't care that Remy has a fairy godparent. And Remy responds saying that he does care about Timmy having godparents because of how hurt he is over his parents not loving him or ever being there for him. Remy feels like it's unfair that Timmy has 2 fairy godparents when his life isn't nearly bad as his own, in Remy's opinion. I mean, to give him the benefit of the doubt, this poor kid's parents only spend 2 minutes a day with him, and his own dad can't even remember his name. His useless and neglectful parents are so fixated on money and a lavish lifestyle that they don't even realize how they're wasting their son's childhood away. If we truly take a moment to empathize with Remy and see where his pain is coming from, it really doesn't take long to come to the realization that these actions are that of a sad kid who just wants his parents to love him, but they never will. No matter what Remy does, his parents will never love him because they're just too busy with their rich lifestyle. So instead, he takes that anger out on other people who have what he wants. He's got all of these pent-up cravings to finally have parents that love him and care about him, which never get fulfilled. So they end up manifesting anger and hatred inside of him for everyone who does have their needs fulfilled. It's clearly not the right thing to do with those feelings, but when you're a 10-year-old kid, it can be hard to find the right place to let those feelings out. Of course, we definitely need to touch on the part where Remy and his family end up stuck on the island. To me, it was so incredibly sad that Remy's father calls him by the wrong name, but Remy wasn't even mad about it. He's just happy that his dad is at least trying, and if that isn't the saddest thing of all time, I don't know what is. This poor neglected kid is just happy to be simply acknowledged by his father in the first place, even if it's by the wrong name. This right here is a very clear representation of how abuse and trauma from those who are supposed to love you can have the effect of lowering your standards of how you should be treated to such an abysmally low point that you accept things like being called the wrong name just because it feels good to finally be called something by this person. I mean, again, Remy's actions aren't excusable, but we do need to acknowledge that his existence is just so sad in general. I still feel really bad for Remy, if not now, more than ever, because sure, he may have all the time in the world with his parents, but that doesn't make them good parents by default or change the past. Moving on from there, I do want to point out how Remy assumed that Timmy has this great life with 2 fairy godparents who love him and 2 real parents who love him, when Remy himself doesn't even have a single parent that loves him. I get that Remy would perceive it that way, given how awful his situation is, but that definitely doesn't negate any hardships that Timmy goes through pretty regularly. I mean, in all reality, Timmy's parents love him, but he gets way more time with Vicky than he does with them. And, well, though they love him, his parents are pretty awful if we're being honest. Hence why Timmy has fairies in the first place. Like we touched on earlier, having crappy parents and a crappy life are the qualifiers for the most part. It's just really lame for Remy to assume that this other kid who has fairies is on his high horse living a great life of sunshine and rainbows, not really stopping to think about what may have led to him getting his fairies in the first place. Speaking of the fairies though, one thing I find interesting is the fact that the fairies all seem to have this extreme justice complex on a societal level. I mean, they each have a standard issue rulebook, they have an entire court system, and if I recall correctly, I think they have a high council as well. Yet when it came to this duel, that sense of needing rules seemed to kind of go out the window as Remy is allowed to use his money to his advantage multiple times in using it to distract the guy staring at the fire or using his cell phone to call his paid consultants. I just honestly find it so odd that all of these fairies are putting on such a grand contest that seemingly has no rules for the participants, when they live in a society that's built entirely on the back of strictly enforced rules. When it comes to the actual events of this episode though, reflecting on everything from start to finish, Remy being a jerk to Timmy, discovering that he has fairies, confronting each other, demanding a magical duel, and of course, the outcome. It's worth noting that all of this is Remy's fault. He did all of this to himself. As it relates to the moral of the story, though, there are just way too many messages to be gained here. It's almost too many to list. Of course, money can't buy happiness. You shouldn't try to take someone down out of spite or jealousy over their happiness. Just because someone is mean and spiteful to you doesn't mean that they aren't deserving of a little empathy. You should know how to take no as an answer when someone isn't interested in you. Childhood is short, enjoy time with your kids while they're young. Not always, but people can definitely become a product of their environment, as seen with Remy. I mean, I'm sure there are more, but yeah, there is really a lot that one could gain from this episode on a human level. One thing that I really found interesting was that part where Cosmo was talking crap to Wandisimo. First of all, it was absolutely hilarious and his impression was spot on. I mean, when he did the monkey chunky hunky, I legit couldn't tell which one was the real Wandisimo. But what really caught my attention was a comment that Cosmo made. He says something about Wandisimo losing his woman to an idiot. This one, I'll be honest guys, really threw me through a loop. This seemingly small statement in a moment of jest actually has me really curious about how Cosmo and Wanda got together. I mean, Cosmo saying it that way kind of implies that Wanda was in a position where she was forced to pick between the two, and she picked Cosmo. But I'm not sure. Sounds like some spicy drama though. If there's anything else I wanted to bring up in closing, it would be the morbid implication of Wandisimo's fate at the end of this episode. When we see Remy and his family crash landed on a deserted island, Remy goes searching for food, only to find Wandisimo as a turtle. I will admit, this part made me pretty sad as a kid. I mean, him looking at Wandisimo and thinking that he looks familiar, but of course drawing a blank, it was a little bit heartbreaking. But the heartbreak doesn't last long as it quickly turns to shock from the implication that Wandisimo was eaten by his former god kid. If I'm being honest though, that's pretty metal actually, but nevertheless extremely morbid all the same. I mean, imagine spending years with someone and building a relationship with them as your guardian, just to end up eating them someday completely blissful to the fact that they are someone that once meant a lot to you. Ugh, it sends shivers down my spine. But what do you guys think? Do you think Remy was the saddest character in the Fairly Odd Parents? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. And you know what? Hey you, true 90s kids on Patreon. That's right, you guys. I'm talking to you. I want you to know that I freaking love all of you. All of these names that you see on screen right here, these are people who are super important to me. And I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for helping keep this dream afloat. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like and maybe give a little praise to the algorithm in hopes that it pushes this one to everybody else. If you want to go on another nostalgic walk down memory lane, check out this video on the left about a super morbid episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Or hey, if that isn't your show of choice, no worries, you can check out this awesome video on the right. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Peace.